Spacefair. What is a UFO? Hi guys, this is Caleb. Hope you're well. This is a really cool show. We're talking with JMill, aka Jonathan Miller. He taught a course at MIT last year that he's hoping to expand about confronting the unknown and using sense-making apparati to understand the world in various ways. Really interesting dude, very high-level thinker, brilliant guy. This is a bit of a heady conversation. I think you're going to have a lot of fun. We talk about some like sensors. We talk about the different modalities with which we approach this topic from different points of view. It's not super juicy in terms of like where the mantids live or whatever, but it's a high level, responsible intellectual engagement with the subject, as you have come to expect from WTUFO. So I hope you enjoy, and I just want to say thank you to all the people who support this show on patreon.com/WTUFO or on youtube.com/@whattheufo. Either place you could support us for $1 a month or $10 a month if you'd like. Hey, go nuts. Support us for $100 a month. But if you can afford $1 a month, which I think we could reasonably hypothesize that you probably could, if you paid $1 more a month for your Wi-Fi every month, you probably wouldn't notice that. So take that not noticed $1, throw it to WTUFO. The show will get bigger. More people will learn about it. We'll have more guests, and you will benefit as well as the rest of the world. You will help us advance our collective mission of bringing more light to this fascinating topic. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy the episode. Here you go. What the UFO? I'm here with Jonathan Miller, aka JMill. Thank you so much for joining us, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Caleb.
It's really great to talk to you. We spoke a little bit offline, so we're not meeting for the first time here, but I've been really excited to meet you. You have a fascinating multidisciplinary background, and I thought we could start with that, and then I'll lay out our model of the conversation. Sound good?
Absolutely. Let's go.
Cool. So can you tell us a little bit about your sprawling, interesting history as an academician, entrepreneur? Where do you sit in this intersection of science and business and curiosity and government? You seem to have a fascinating portfolio.
That's the happy spot. I kind of in the liminal spaces across all of those. So my passion and focus is on particularly on early stage frontier technology commercialization. I call it from lab to launch. And so I have a background, as you mentioned, an entrepreneur, multiple companies, saw those to various levels of success. Also a former venture capital investor, and as well as sort of, I guess, fundamentally a champion for, advocate for entrepreneurs who are trying to not only, make a buck to help keep the, a good company going, but really to be able to develop sort of like these science advantaged organizations that can really deliver meaningful impact to the world in some form or function. And so that those problem sets are incredibly challenging. They are incredibly not just interdisciplinary, but transdisciplinary. And so that's what gets me, out of bed with a bounce in my step every day.
How would you describe the interdisciplinary versus transdisciplinary distinction?
So some of it is, for me, is that we all have a tendency, and I have some academic affiliations where we may want to try to box things into, like, this is chemistry, this is biology, is this a robot or is this not a robot? Well, it's a little bit of hair splitting in some situations. There's utility in it, but to go someone who's interdisciplinary, to me, is someone who's able to, say, maybe a business person who's able to speak well enough with, say, an engineer. I mean, we're sort of drawing like sort of rough demographics here, but and then there's like a designer person who's like, hey, like trying to understand and translate on the fly what the engineer person's saying, what the scientist, what the business person is saying. That to me is an interdisciplinary skill, some fluency that way. But then with the transdisciplinary work is someone's who are able to do meaningful work across multiple of those sort of fields or domains, all in the same kind of person. Not that they are a soldier of one necessarily, but they can have these kind of like multiple talents or multiple interests and are willing to kind of say, you know what, we can blur the lines a little bit on is this topic A or topic B, because the focus is on the mission and the challenge that to be solved. Challenges are, emerging all the time, and I don't think that they're necessarily created in a way that says, you know what, I'm a challenge, and I want just a chemist to solve this, or just a seamstress who knows how to like work her way around like some kind of like textile things or something. It's like, no, we just got to throw out some of the rule book, say, what tools do we have? What skills do we have? And let's bring it to bear across, bits, across atoms, and across brains.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's fascinating enough that we could just have a whole conversation about entrepreneurialism and transdisciplinary action, especially in this age of AI. But instead, we're going to talk about UAP because it's an area of shared interest. So to sketch out for people what we're going to cover here, we're going to loosely focus on, I guess, these 4 pillars here, and then we'll explore and weave as questions come up. One is your mental model of the UAP topic. What do you think we can say about what's going on? What questions do you have about what's going on? 2 is sense making and confronting unknowns, your project and mission in this course and this framework of thinking about things, the value you see to this frame of inquiry, and sub-question how clear thinking and open curiosity can interact with and confront stigma and taboo. Then we're going to do on-ramps to serious UAP research, interdisciplinary approaches, the intersection between defense, startup, and academic cultures and practices. And we'll try to close with what we should do in the years ahead. And we found ourselves talking in our offline interview about just the role of hypothesis in this investigation. That doesn't necessarily have to be at the end. It's so interesting. Maybe we could even start with it, but how we think about ideas that we propose that we're not sure about, questions that we're asking, how to investigate them, et cetera. So let's start with the 30,000-foot view, your mental model of the UAP topic. What do you think we can say about what's going on, and what questions do you have about the situation?
Well, there's a lot there, and I think what the pillars you outlined are an absolutely great sort of scaffolding for this. So let's get into some on say UAP is definitionally. I mean, words have meaning. Definitions change a little bit. It used to be like UFO. There's some stigma attached to that. There's stigma attached to anything, but now, as UAP, unidentified, say, anomalous phenomena. Well, if we decompose that, unidentified, what's that? Anomalous. Well, that's it's even hard to describe what one's seeing, or mental model for that. And phenomena, which is just like things, whether it's physical or non-physical or whatever. With UAP, then we're living in a world of that's from 60 years ago, definitely 100 years ago, looks a lot like science fiction. To a century-old eyes, that now we have the benefit of seeing science fact. I have a smartphone that is incredibly mind-boggling if you really think about it. This is like rock and just minerals and stuff that have been mushed together in certain ways and metals to make it do amazing things. I'm not saying that all science fiction is going to become fact, but the fact is that with UAP, there's such a corpus of reports and in some ways data or lack thereof to help us explore or at least to challenge us in our thinking. It's kind of like good healthy scientific process and just good healthy mental model to say, recognize I and maybe nobody knows everything, so let's keep an open mind as to what may be, because in the pursuit of trying to face this challenge of that UAP as an ensemble of challenges presents, along the way of trying to understand those kinds of unknowns, we may discover some really incredible stuff along the way. New types of sensor technology, new types of ways of fusing different data streams together, new ways of just understanding not whatever the phenomena is or how it works or whatever origins, but a lot of it's kind of like mirror holding in terms of how we as humans and our world around us, the prosaic world around us, and dolphins. How do dolphins think? We actually really don't know, but those are super, to me, those are very useful potential discoveries on that bigger, longer path to understanding and characterizing UAP.
Interesting. A couple things that floated up for me here were that the idea of anomalousness embedded in the UAP concept points to the unexplainable. So we often say 97% of UFO sightings are just generic objects, right? And I wonder what you think about saying, yeah, that's true, but so the UAP are the things we can't explain when we've tried as hard as we could. So the UAP are the 3% rather than the UAP are everything, and then most UAP turn out to be generic. Like the UAP are the distilled, refined. I don't know. Maybe that's not a useful distinction. Curious what you think. The other thing, other two-ish points that sort of blend together are this history of outlying observations, like weird data, points that we can't explain with our models of the world as we have them, are very interesting, but many people don't know that they're there. Like a lot of people the situation, even very serious, scientifically minded people, they're just not aware that there is a large amount of anomalous data in the historic record. So it doesn't seem weird to them because they just don't know it exists. They think there are a few thousand UFO reports and they're mostly explainable. And they probably don't know that there are millions, and they probably don't know that the thousands of those millions are still unexplained to this day, even after we tried as hard as we could. So I'm curious what you think about that sort of two-part question. One, what do you think about sort of reducing the field of UAP to just the ones we can't explain? Does that make sense as a definition for the UAP? And then two, what do you think about this sort of problem of noticing, the failure of awareness, which should inspire curiosity?
It would be fantastic if we could get that 3% of unexplainable cases or situations down to zero. That's kind of the goal. And so, yeah, let's explain as much as feasible. Where I think a point of concern is, and various groups and organized and otherwise over decades seem to say, well, we've explained it, but this doesn't quite pass the muster of other sort of stakeholders or folks within that kind of ecosystem, right? So just because someone has an explanation does not necessarily mean that it is explained, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of we may be talking at each other, but are we really communicating? Is it going in and processing? That's at least an analogy for me. And so those, so some of it comes down to the sausage making of an explanation. Well, what are the assumptions that were established? It's okay to have assumptions. It's just becomes a problem, and if we fail to revisit assumptions in light of other things going on. So if you just anchor on it, that can be a problem and get it. And that could be whether you're an intelligence field officer who's trying to keep folks alive and serve the mission, or you're trying to go get your groceries, and the assumption is I assumed I had fuel in the gas tank. If you fail to check it now and then, you'll be in a problem situation. And so with UAP is let's try to push the number of cases into single digit percentages, and then even then I'd start adding decimal points in terms of how few are unexplainable, provided that we can explain in a very reasonable way all those others. And so if it's and again, words have meaning. So if it's like drones, well, tell us more. Let's figure out more. And I think some of that misinformation, potentially disinformation or malinformation, that is what the public certainly seems to be receptive to, or pretty good at detecting. Is wait, there's multiple kinds of statements being made that neither of which can be true together. Either one or the other, or both are either maybe just misinformed or something, and that kind of creates a kind of a cognitive dissonance in the political discourse, in just a general information environment that causes people to be either what's going on, and they either want to buckle down and try to like figure out better explanations, forming hypotheses, or just outright being like, "Oh, this is all a bunch of hogwash." And now, and if it's just the ostrich algorithm of put your head in the sand, that's fine for a lot of folks, because again, we got to go get our groceries. We still have to live our lives, but that doesn't necessarily get at the root and the potential uncorking of a lot of opportunities if we face these challenges and recognize the unknowns and start to try to walk a ladder of making them more known, more characterized, potentially more explainable, and just maybe some big scientific discoveries and life discoveries along the way.
Interesting. I think you sort of just answered this, but I wonder what you think about this line between thinking that UAP are interesting or not, basically. Like, do you think the situation is that from your perspective, UAP are interesting? Like, there is a curious question here to which we don't have a good answer yet, and do you see a line in the scientific or the technological communities between people who are curious and people who assume there's no interesting answer to this question?
I think curiosity is super useful. Now, people may be like, "Well, curiosity killed the cat." Well, but also curiosity led us to like having like good antibiotics and stuff too. So it's if one's perfectly happy in one's worldview and everything's well defined, everything's happy. Okay, I mean that's a natural thing for a lot of humans, but also we think we've come a number of ways since the caveman days, because we were curious about things like fire and building stuff and how to use animals to help do work like pumping water, etc. And so that pursuit of what could be, how even if it could be self-serving, how to make me have to do less work. And I'll invent stuff along the way, like a productive procrastination in some way. That can be, in my opinion, can be a very helpful aptitude or disposition for a scientist or engineer or someone who may not even consider themselves a scientist or engineer, but that walking that pathway of, well, I'm going to try to not just shoot willy-nilly on ideas. Let's try to describe it, use the words that we have available, and revisit as we go, establishing that hypothesis, that optimism that there may be something we don't understand. And then as we feel like we have a pretty good, 80, 90% level of explanation, do the double blind kind of thing. Like, let's kind of hand the data to someone and sort of a sense of explanation or whatever and methodology, and see, can they reproduce that without the enthusiasm that you or I may have for that. When you start to get it, then that's in the medical community, that's a common practice to say, here, our team of doctors think this is the indication. Let's send radiology samples and stuff to other physician teams and see, do they independently have that kind of assessment. And if you get a bunch of like, hey, yeah, this is weird, or this is this kind of indication or illness or whatever in a medical context, then you start to get a better confidence in the explanations that we would be putting forth. So in astronomy, in other material sciences, et cetera, that would be a common thing to try to start to put some other eyeballs on it without beating our chest and saying, this is how it happens. Well, here's a proposition, and here's some evidence to do it. What do you think?
Yeah, one thing that occurred to me while you were speaking there was the difference that makes UAP so hard to investigate compared to, say, like a medical process or like an electromechanical process, is that they're so far, we haven't figured out a way for them to be useful to us. And they're also not in the way of us doing useful things that we want to do. So if there's like an electromechanical issue that's preventing us from building a certain type of circuit, well, we want to resolve that because we need that circuit. Or if there's like a biomechanical issue that's causing heart attacks, we want to understand it because we want to stop the heart attacks. UAP are like interesting, but they're not like in our way, except in as much as they're sometimes a crash risk, which is why I think the like Americans for Safe Aerospace have an intriguing angle in. And then you're starting to see a little bit of entrepreneurial interest, like, well, if this stuff is real, maybe we could harness it for, I don't know, intriguing technological developments. So curious if that does anything interesting for you.
Yeah. Well,
and
I'd pause there, that saying that they're not experienced for myself, but having, like sort of, engaged with folks who may have, or been on some sort of like observational end of some element of UAP, it can be incredibly life-changing. And I'm not going to, sort of spitball as to what that kind of some of those changes and influences, the experiences can be. But if you put anybody or anything, but let's say any person, and provide them an experience that they just do not have a mental model to process that. It's kind of like divide by zero, like it does not compute. And that can put somebody, highly likely will put them into a very sort of scared position. I don't think anybody would want a, say a commercial airline pilot, much less a fighter pilot, who is focused on whatever their job or task or mission is, and to be like, whoa, mental explosion. Like, what is that when we're trained as trained observers to understand and categorize and then disseminate and describe, what it is. And so if a UAP, situation emerges and you have a fighter pilot who is highly distracted from their mission, or even worse, cases where there would be grounding of a fleet or even repositioning of a fleet of jet fighter aircraft, and because of a repositioning of the fleet because of UAP incursions, then seats in the Senate, U.S. Senate, are now unprotected. That causes significant kind of like, well, not more than head scratching. It's like, oh my gosh, like we actually now have seats of power in the United States government that are physically unprotected from air cover because of repositioning of aircraft due to other bases being incurred on, or flying through of like concerns in parts of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic where there are nuclear energy facilities and observations of UAP, in this case like orbs or whatever, flying through the toxic emissions of some of these facilities, and so whatever is flying through, as it's been described to me, whatever concern is, if something's flying through that plume, it's reasonable to be concerned that the toxins that are in that plume may have been then dispersed out of our spec, into neighboring community or something. That would be a big concern. Now, I'm not saying that UAP physics may or may not move air like that or move a plume, but those are valid concerns in my opinion that would cause very abrupt disruption to our normal day to day for particular people or particular groups of people.
Yeah, really good point. So this question is not super fun for everybody. You don't have to answer it if you don't want, but I would love to get the level at which you are comfortable answering it. It's just a what do you think is going on question. Like, do you have a best guess, a leading theory? Do you like to sort of bucket things into secret human tech, secret US tech, secret adversarial tech, and then like atmospheric phenomena, and then non-human technological interference, or higher woo theories than that? Do you how do you think about it? Like, do you work with buckets? Do you have a leading theory?
Well, it's likely that there is something going on, or some things. It's probably an entire mosaic of all of the above, and perhaps in some form or function. But that the one of the very human kind of issues that I see is that there can be statements made based on appeals to authority that the public or your average person may be like, well, okay, who says, and there may be comments or there may be non-comments toward particular situations that we'd see, bubbling up on the news or on X or whatever. And there may be an information vacuum that opens up, and whatever, just like in a normal like science vacuum, whatever is around can feed into that, whether it's trolls or some whatever agency or anything else that can feed that. And so that can sort of change hearts and minds a little bit, just from an information perspective. But I think more at the core of what your question is around is that, like, I mean, we have evidence thing, and reason it's reasonable to think that there can be adversarial and sort of like domestic like forms of multi-rotor drones or non-rotor kinds of uncrewed craft. Certainly, I mean, we're seeing labs and things and even in the commercial market here and there, there's greater deployments of pretty compelling kinds of uncrewed aircraft that are doing meaningful work. That's in the like unclassified setting. In the classified settings, we can imagine that it's probably more advanced in some ways. Not necessarily that everything's a black triangle or it's all like secret government projects. Because if everything's just a U.S. or Western world secret project, there would be significant violations of standard procedures to like taking, say, test or even production level kind of equipment, and basically buzzing and distracting other service members from their work. For example, why hang around U.S. carrier groups and cause disruptions day after day to flight operations? That's like a blue on blue risk of attack, like friendly, but in an unfriendly way. Right? It would be the same team influencing each other very negatively, and so that would be a concern if it's a wide scale application of that. And near peer, frenemies, certainly there can be, very incredible levels of technologies that could be developed. We see with artificial intelligence as a form of non-human intelligence, getting better, and so that can, some of that can solve a lot of problems of humanity that we don't have enough pilots to get our Amazon goods from like one side of the country to the other. If it was to go from two pilot operation of a freighter cargo plane to single pilot operation with a really good, basically robot, wingman, so to say, that can solve multiple things. We don't have enough humans that are trained to do the good job, and the technology is getting better to handle that, and may even in some ways have even better safeguards in place to help. So when there is an issue, you can lose the plane, but you don't lose a person in addition to the plane, for example.
Definitely bullish on drone tech. This is sort of getting toward the last conversational question, so we may return to it. But do you think it's reasonable to investigate the hypothesis that some UAP are non-human technology?
Sure. It's we can leave it. I will leave it blank as to what non-human would be. Artificial intelligence, sure. But if it's and we have congressional record and folks on various levels of authority saying non-human biologics, that's really interesting. I mean, I have friends and colleagues who work on like biological robots. These are sort of like lab grade, but fascinating to think about how we might be able to, again, this would be probably down the road, but being able to figure out ways of biology does amazing things. It makes incredibly complex molecules. It makes us literally be able to like move around as like, we're mostly water, but we got some other stuff that helps give us, so we're not just pools of jello. And so, yeah, that would be fantastic to explore. And is everything like Little Green Men or something? I don't know. Certainly I wouldn't want to presuppose and have mental foreclosure on, that's that, that is it.
Yeah.
Let's keep an open mind, and try to follow some of that evidence where it leads.
I agree. I just think that this is a good, bright line because the way even very serious people talk about this when they get close to it, like I love the ODNI report to Congress in, I think, 2021. It's like 9 pages. They summarize a whole bunch of important stuff. They find that most of these things are physical. They don't have evidence that they're adversarial. They don't have evidence that they're U.S. tech, but then they don't speculate about what else they could be. And so there's like, they have like a 5 category list of possible explanations. It's like trash, tech we don't understand or whatever. And then the 5th one is just other. And they don't speculate non-human technology. Nobody says those words in that page, in that report. And I wonder if you think there's a value to kind of calling the shot there to say is it impossible to find something you're not looking for? I guess is sort of what I'm asking. Like, do you think it's valuable to say, look, this is a specific hypothesis that we should investigate? Because if it's on one side of this bright line, it's extremely interesting. And if we can rule out that bright line, then it's interesting, but in a totally different way. So like, if any of these things are potentially non-human technology, or at least non-modern human technology, to fold in the extra tempestrial model, then that's fascinating. And it opens the door, as you suggested, to like myriad potential explanations and possibly a panoply of such explanations, a myriad panoply, to have some fun.
That's good. We're going above like 6th grade level vocabulary, which is exciting.
both fantastic words.
No, don't ask me to spell those words. But.
But if it's not past that line, it's interesting, but it's a little more like, all right, well, let's just crunch the numbers and we'll find out who has what. And it's just not that exciting anymore. So that seems to me to be like a bright line worth exploring. Rather than push you on that, I'll entree us into our next topic, which is sense making and confronting unknowns.
One pause is that if we walk the line of thinking of, okay, it's not non-human biological technology, all right, how would we approach things differently than we may be? Or as I could say, a citizen scientist, someone who's listening to this is like, I want to build the sensor payload in my backyard that's going to detect blah, UAP.
Yeah.
But if it's non-human biological versus something else, like how would we even change our sensor payload? I mean, look for more carbon. Well, that's
totally
supposing that it's going to be carbon based, so I think that I think there's intellectual utility to thinking in that way. I think there is a practical sort of actionable insight that is difficult to gain from that.
Yeah.
Whereas other, as like the 5th column, to be, the McKinsey method of being mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Other is not a sexy way of saying it, but technically it works. And also that I think with maybe like the ODNI report and others, there's a lot of utility. There's actually an extreme amount of utility in being able to rule out something.
Yes.
We're not ruling in, but we're ruling out other stuff. That itself is very useful. I don't need to know where I'm looking, but I need to know where I don't need to look. And that helps us to start to put a little bit of boundary boxes on whatever this is, literally or figuratively speaking. And so that's where I think there is utility. As much as we'd like to say it is X, well, we may be able to at least say it is not Y or Z.
Yeah. So this is like, you point out a very, very hard question. Maybe not impossible, but it's really hard to think of an experiment that would say, I am going to rule out human involvement with this technology. Like how?
Yeah,
what
hard.
way are you limiting this thing? And the best we've got right now is that like no known human technology can do XYZ, can move at 15,000 miles an hour or whatever and turn on a dime and, the observables. But that's where we run into this infinite morass, is that we don't know what we don't know about advanced technological capabilities in like secret military developments. And that goes back 80 years. For me, it's like highly compelling that the early sightings of UFOs are still being reported. Like similar things are still being reported that were reported in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And you could maybe explain those things with DARPA-style tech today, but like it's just a huge reach to theorize that we had advanced propulsion techniques in the 50s that we then did not disseminate through the technological infrastructure of our planet for some reason. It would have to be a giant confusing secret. And so this is the simple logic chain that makes me think that we are likely looking at non-human technology, and that's why I find this so interesting. But I wonder if we can fold that into you explaining your course and your framework of sense making and confronting unknowns. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what this is. I understand that you, at least in part, you taught a course at MIT around this framework. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's earlier this year, we had the honor of being able to conduct the inaugural Confronting Unknowns program at MIT, where I'm a program engineer there and an instructor in residence. So this program or course was I wanted it to be structured as an intensive and inter/transdisciplinary in its approach and in terms of the cohort. Both, from those would be featured speakers as well as those would be participants in other ways. And so, Confronting Unknowns, which information for your viewers and listeners is at sensemaking.wtf. There's no .com, just sensemaking.wtf. Put in your URL, your web browser. So we had the benefit of having really incredible folks who were very enthusiastic to speak. And as part of my intention with this is that it didn't want to be I think I sort of expressly sort of said we're not going to do this in the syllabus, which is we're not going to try to put fingers on what something is. Again, like no little green man or China or future humans or whatever. Like we're not going to worry about that right now, and we're not going to use it as a place to platform what we think individually, personally, an opinion based what it's going to be. We're going to take a technical evidence based approach, and we're going to look at and have discussions from folks who know how to, or at least working on how to make sense in their respective fields and domains. And so that. And in aerospace, we use it as like sense making as the general like leadership quality that I believe is a teachable element and useful, whether you're running an e-commerce company or you want to get and understand the propulsion systems of different kinds of UAP. Either way, it's still sense making as a skill, and then narrow that sort of that boundary because that's like blowing the ocean. Said, okay, let's focus on aerospace safety. Why? Well, because it ties into defense, it ties into advanced technology, national security. There's a lot of us, not everybody, a lot of us have flown in airplanes, and so, or at least hear them and see them, and so there's a recognition that okay, aerospace safety is important, and then we get in using that sort of domain and sense making as a skill, using those as the kind of like the lens or the wedge to then be able to explore the myriad of panoplies or whatever of UAP, where we have trained observers and friends and colleagues like Ryan Graves, former FA-18 pilot, first active duty pilot to disclose UAP, as well as others who are coming from who are not like say. Oh, UAP! Like I love that, or I've been such a following UAP since before it was called UAP. Trying to find folks who are not necessarily all in on UAP, but who are trained on how to focus on and detect anomalies and to confront unknowns in their respective fields of work. For example, Phil Erickson, the director of MIT's Haystack Observatory for like near Earth observation, hearing the way that he described in terms of how do so like geophysicists who are working on picture like the biggest like IMAX screen ever, and they're like someone's like I think there's like 3 pixels in the bottom corner that are either errors or there's something there, and so you imagine you're like in a bazillion pixels, and there's like someone's like there's like 3 over here that are weird. How does the geophysical and astronomy community start to figure out is that error or is there something there? And sort of so with respect to each of the fields, kind of copy pasting that kind of approach. How does a Central Intelligence Agency, a career operative, how does she manage in the field, building up of assumptions. Where does that work? Where does it sometimes fail? And in very unfortunate situations. Again, not tied strictly to UAP, but there's a utility in terms of, in my perspective, to build up that leadership quality of sense making and apply it to whatever field. UAPs are certainly a very interesting and potentially, world changing kind of challenge or set of challenges. And so folks like Harvard psychologist Tim Lamas and his co-authors and collaborators like Martin van Rennekamp, who work on and publish in peer-reviewed journals, in this case, Acta Astronautica, publishing a UAP assessment framework that's modeled on how do we do forensic science in like a crime scene investigation. That, crime scene investigators, they're working with a lot of every possibilities on the table. Is it murder? Is it death? What's going on? And so how do they go and evaluate rigorously in a sort of a transferable and justifiable evidence-based approach their particular line of work? And in the case of what Tim Lamas et al. Did, is like, well, let's be inspired by that. And now as a first effort in the space, let's try to then make a matrix for UAP assessment to sort of qualify on whatever axes, and being willing to say, this is probably not one and done. Like, this is just a first sort of stab at it. We think it's decent. Now, community, read that and try it and revise it. To me, that's very healthy and very useful for all of us to be inspired. That's why I say it's not just interdisciplinary; it's transdisciplinary people who can think across a couple different ways of how engineers and business people and designers, et cetera, think about it, and then approach it to their particular mission set.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, it segues really nicely into our on-ramp to serious UAP research question, which is to say, like, what ideas came up for you? What questions or concepts might have emerged from teaching this course for the first time about interdisciplinary approaches, intersection between defense, startup, and academic cultures and practices? Like, do you feel like you made some progress or you have some ideas about what should come next in terms of serious research?
Well, yes, certainly substantial progress. A year ago, where I had a hypothesis that some course, I didn't have a name for it, and stuff. I was like, I think a course along these lines, A, should exist, B, or maybe one should exist, two, this is an approach to it, three, it would be very important to have it at a place with which I have some familiarity at MIT, and then I think I'm on 5, I lost count, that I may be one of those people that could help make that happen. Okay, so we in my opinion, we very much sort of exhibited that when running Confronting Unknowns at MIT earlier this year. And then the cohort, was very receptive. And we were careful in terms of we picked in terms of like finding like really great people and we did it. Thank you, cohort members and speakers for making it magical. And a high net promoter score in terms of folks that are like, yes, this is a useful way of not just exploring UAP, but in general, sense making is a leadership skill as a t-shirt that is important to me also, though. And so coming out of this experience, I mean, we're still in it. We're actually right now working on I invited the whole cohort. Let's as volunteers, let's collaboratively prepare a paper on not like what happened at the course, but like a superset of that. Like what's relevant? What do we think folks should what would like a Senate staffer? What document would be helpful for him or her to have to then be able to hand to the senator that's employing them, and that senator to then be able to hand it to his or her collaborators. Like is the message that we should be sharing for that as a reflection of the course. So we're working on that. Expect circa May for that release, and then we'll post it at sensemaking.wtf. Cool. But other aspects are on certainly funding is elusive, but we reasonably believe that is resolvable. Better publication record and more publications in peer-reviewed and not peer-reviewed environments. Legislation is always a little slow, but and always a little. I mean, it's politics. It's like the quintessential politics. But there is sort of good movements in New Jersey, in Connecticut, in Pennsylvania, in Vermont. Outside of the U.S., there's in Ireland, for example. There are these I guess semi-autonomous sort of distributed groups and percolations that are occurring that are, in my opinion, very healthy and probably much needed to be able to make particularly the public better informed as to what this could be. There's citizen scientists like all the way, like, hey, that's great. Like I was, SETI at home way back when,
nice.
with my little like 300 megahertz, I don't know, Pentium or whatever.
Totally.
Any computer
Project Listen or whatever. I remember signing up for that.
There's in the BOINC on the Berkeley Open so distributing computing platform. Anyway, these are older ways of doing it. And so what's the modern equivalent? Well, I think we're still trying to figure that out. I have hope that there will be sort of like what the inspired by what little we know about like the Gremlin program that the Georgia Tech Research Institute has deployed at a particular national security site to do sort of baseline pattern of life assessment over 90 days. My understanding is that assessment is done. Now it's sort of data ingesting whatever the sensors are tuned to be looking for or to be not looking for, right? And in terms of figuring out the negative of it, if I know where the negative space is, I can find the positive space, to use like a art and design phrasing, and we may be in a situation, and a lot of this skews into some of our other work on like national security and like defense oriented frontier technologies. The best, the best and most sophisticated systems are often in like classified environments, often like the U.S. military or allies, or even near peer adversaries in some situations. And so can make sense in some ways why some of the UAP stuff skews heavily toward some of those sites or situations. They've got some of the best sensor fusion. The Navy as a branch of the military is special, and they're all special in their own way. But the Navy has sea assets, undersea assets, air assets, space assets. Like the Navy's in a unique position to be, and the way the command and control structure works, to be able to sensor fuse and report and triangulate, or maybe not triangulate, it's not the right word. That's part of it, but also to have different modes of sensors being able to capture some sort of phenomena, right? Is that out of reach of a citizen scientist? Well, on the fancy end, yeah. And so that's a little disheartening, but I don't know. I think it's worth the pursuit. If you get your, I'm not saying everybody go out and get your Bigfoot camera with your thermals and plunk $10,000 and spec out the RV to make your UAP hunting vehicle. But perhaps there are some ways of being able to document and contribute it. That's another part of it. How does, if once you got it, a footage or something, where do we disseminate that? Or how do we share it? Americans for Safe Aerospace, of which I'm a volunteer and a supportive member of that, is striving to as it's like nonprofit, unbiased in this approach. It's like we are building, our team is building, even better ways of sort of ingesting reports in an unbiased way. And then where feasible, being able to, interview folks, we have very serious analysts who are look through and without leading the witness, try to get an understanding of that person and the situation overall, and then work with say agency partners or whoever is appropriate. And this changes over time. AARO, for example, AARO, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office has sort of taken its licks over the years. We have hope that it will earn its trust again. That had been, I think, maybe a little lost or were presupposed in other agencies that do show a serious interest in the phenomena, broadly speaking.
Yeah, what this points me to is a broadly diffused effort, I guess, is what I was imagining when you were talking there was like a suite of sensors around the world that are in some sense calibrated similarly and like meet similar standards, and maybe they have like sensor watermarks on their data so that we know that they're real. I kind of feel like there might be an application for blockchain tech here, like to demonstrate at like the code level that the data coming through these sensors is in fact genuine and not AI, because that's a huge problem right now. But it sort of sounds like what we're talking about is just the cheaper, better cameras and sensors in general being more widely available, potentially opening the door to widely diffused efforts to get better information about this, because right now the sensor monopoly overwhelmingly favors secretive organizations like militaries. I'm also curious what you think about the entrepreneurial space here. Like, do you think there's sort of an angle for run and gun entrepreneurs to say, I don't know, like, let's learn about physics in a way that we could benefit from financially, or maybe there's an entrepreneurial angle to the sensor manufacturing aspect of this. I don't know. You could start a company around a UFO kit that you can, sell to a couple million people and develop a sensor platform that would be reliable and widespread. What do you think? Does either of those concepts or bounce anything interesting for you? Moving toward what should we do next here?
Right. I think there's plenty of relatively low hanging fruit. Certainly, as an entrepreneur, again, as an advocate for entrepreneurs, particularly tech focused, because that's sort of my jam. But it's that, like, what's motivating you, or one, right? And if it's the long view is like you're interested in UAP, and why not you to help be able to figure out how to understand it and approximate it or characterize it or understand it in some way. That like demystification, and it take, as an entrepreneur, it would take a little bit of hubris to say, it's me, not, that, but that's that kind of confidence or hope that I think is very important. In the United States, capitalist environment, we've done well as a nation based on entrepreneurs. So cheers to them who are trying to risk their shirts to try to make something better.
Yeah, I'm bullish on entrepreneurialism. I like creative, independent, freewheeling, can-do spirits. And
I don't know freewheeling. They're can-do. Yeah, that's the thing.
Okay.
We on ways of improving sensors and things like backyard sensors. Sure, I think all of what you mentioned could be of interest. I know of a weather station, not like the Weather Channel, but like a weather kit, I guess, that does. You mint tokens or whatever based on how much data your particular weather station is feeding into the network, and then what's paying that? Well, I mean, I or somebody would you buy the hardware, but then that feed into the network, in this case on a blockchain based thing. A network would then, at least hypothetically, would be maybe of value as one of many layers of physical data that a insurance company or an insurer for like real estate or whatever climate may want to understand, or a financial institution of some other form that's underwriting this. And so, yeah, there could be something that is on the path. Maybe in the entrepreneur's mind, it's part of their self-described mission to pursue UAP, and on the way, they're like, we can build and fund and figure out what comes next by these sort of like off takes along the way. That could be perfectly
That's clever.
healthy. Yeah. I mean, it could work. I think. I mean, there's more we could go on that, but I think could be cool.
Well, as we reach the end of our time here, I'd love to just ask, what do you think we should generally do in the few years ahead hopefully in the many years ahead, but like in this next few years, what should we be focused on? What are the most important steps for people who are interested in UAP to take? And what do you hope to see the scientific, academic, military, and entrepreneurial communities pursuing?
Well, It takes some inspiration from like Mike Gold, Michael Gold, who's part of Redwire Space, and they're building it's almost bigger than a startup now, but as part of putting sensors in their case on the moon, seeing and being willing to recognize that there's on the moon there's sort of weird lights, to use a non-technical description, just a light source or sources or whatever that seem to be striped or banded in a way that we don't know what would be causing that. Is it definitely little green men? No, I don't know. Whatever. It's on the moon. It's hard to tell. But so inspiration from folks like him that are like, well, let's see how we can deploy resources to serve that, as well as other missions. We found the Titanic, the ship, through work by Bob Ballard and his team that were doing classified military work, and they got their job done. And the military apparently was like, well, you've got the ship for another couple of days or whatever. You did the mission, so whatever you want, And so folks who were like Bob Ballard in this case, or Mike Gold, who are like, I have an idea. Let's go looking for blah, and being willing to task resources to that. To me, that's inspirational, and those are like the happy accidents or whatever that can lead to potentially world changing, discoveries. I think we need to. For the everyday person, is, to me, one of the biggest concerns is the information environment. We are coming, even like right now, and I think when this episode releases, is we have Day of Disclosure, the documentary that came out publicly in November of 2025.
Age of Disclosure, I think, maybe.
Or should be Age of Disclosure, sorry. And then Disclosure Day from Steven Spielberg, a presumably fiction work coming out in June. And so now and presumably into the future, a heavy, noisy information environment. And so I think it's as a actionable insight that I myself try to get better at is, and for everybody else, I encourage you to, is to really try to understand, build an intuition for how information flows, and where there is an absence of information, where there is a dearth of information, and using that as a way to help us sort of calibrate our psychology a little bit. And by that I mean that we're if we have yet more evidence from like the 1960s crash or something, or like I grew up not far from Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, where there's apparently Unsolved Mysteries. The TV show had a feature on it. There's an acorn shaped craft or whatever that kind of crashed into there, and then it got taken out on a military style flatbed truck. It's in the 60s or whatever. So if we get more and more information from old cases, is that really going to change the discourse? I don't think so, because some of that emerges, and it feels like it was a long time ago because it was a long time ago. So focusing on recency is very important, so that as things occur, and another New Jersey drone flap or something, and these things happen across the world, it's not just in the United States, of course, as they occur, and trying to be able to sort of live document and qualify and recognize that there's Agency X said this, then the FAA said that, and then and all this other stuff that's going on, trying to just work on making sense in your own little worldview, trying to make sense of it, and not try to convert someone cherished a skeptic, someone who just knee-jerk reaction says it's not. That's not like a full-on skeptic, a skeptic who's we don't know. That's, to me, those people, all of us should have. It's best practice if we all have some of that skepticism, as well as enthusiasm for what may be, but that well, wait, what are we not seeing here? Maintaining that sort of optionality of potential scenarios of what whatever, I don't know, maybe, the next, the Chinese balloon incident of 2023. It's not just one. There was, like at least like 5 different kinds of, incursions or objects of concern. Whenever the next kind of situation that will not look like that probably, but we may have this sort of pattern matching of that. All of us to try to do our best to not panic, sense make, try to make sense, recognize that there is an unknown, start to try to identify and help others so that we don't run around with our hair on fire, right? Want to be kind of an optimistic, like, I can try to make progress in understanding this, and I still have to go get bread, to feed the family.
Yeah, it's very close to home for me. Wonder personally, just like, what are you up to this next year? What are you working on in 2026?
A great question. So certainly excited about what can be for maybe what will be for sensemaking.wtf/confronting unknowns, where it'd be awesome to run that again at MIT with our really fantastic collaborators there, as well as it's knowledge that I feel aspirationally is something that we can share and better, like, so advancing the community in some way. So for your listeners and readers who are obviously interested in the UAP topic and sense making broadly, I encourage you all to consider signing up for the mailing list that I have at sensemaking.wtf. I send pleasantly infrequent correspondence there, but if you're game to read the Confronting Unknowns at MIT paper, the sort of volunteer collaboratively written paper, we will be releasing it to the mailing list when it's ready. So that's Avenue 1 of 3. Avenue 2 is if you're interested in sort of like frontier technologies in general, and specifically around like sort of startup companies, entrepreneurs, if you're in the market investing into those areas, I run a new public benefit endeavor called The End Effector. It's at endeff.com. So the End Effector is where I and my colleagues we write about like robotics and machine intelligence and the quantum sciences, and we also have a free mailing list that's semi-weekly called Telemetry. That's at telemetry.endeff.com. And finally, for those of you who want more sort of podcast content or YouTube channel content, I am a co-host with my friend Forrest of the podcast called Tough Tech Today, toughtechtoday.com. And there is where we have the opportunity to invite in the tough tech trailblazers who are really sort of building or supporting the technologies. Probably half of our guests are the entrepreneurs themselves at the like operator level, and the other half is a mix of some of the key supporters or enablers, like investors or policymakers, et cetera. And so we actually have a recent episode that's about solving the unknown that is directly linked to why maybe like the tough tech community should care about unidentified anomalous phenomena as a problem set worth pursuing. So that's there's a couple different avenues, and feel free to find me on LinkedIn or reach out. I'm happy to talk more. Thank you so much, Caleb, for talking with me about these topics. There's a lot of meat on the bone, and it's super exciting.
Seriously, this was a total delight for me. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time, and I look forward to following up with you as we all learn more about this weird, wild stuff.
Yeah, it takes a community, and so let's do it together.
Thank you, man. Great to meet you. Hope you have an excellent year, and we'll be in touch. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Caleb.
And that's the show. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying it, please like and subscribe and share this with people who you think might like it. You could also directly support us at patreon.com/WTUFO for $1 a month. We do some chatting in there, and you can propose questions for future episodes. You could also check out spacefair.etsy.com. That's our company's main merch site where you could support us commercially and pick up some cool gear. Thank you again for listening. Hope you have a lovely day.